Holy shitballs, Batman! This show keeps getting worse all the time. Now you guys know I don't usually do this. I usually like to wait until the whole season is out before I review shows, but the new episode just came out and there is way too much to say about it. If I were to do a review on the whole show, there's just a lot I wouldn't be able to talk about from this episode for pacing reasons that deserve to be touched upon. So that'll be what this is for. It seems we've hit that point that every one of these Disney Star Wars shows reaches where the rule of cool supersedes basic logic and cause and effect, and the fan base cheers in unison at how awesome it was. In this episode, we got to see the epic battle between 8 Jedi and 1 Sith Lord. And to hear the creatives tell it, this was a match to rival the Duel of the Fates, so this should be exciting. The story so far has followed former Jedi Osha Anaseya as she's wrongfully accused of the murder of a Jedi Master, and has gone with them to investigate the true culprit, who turns out to be her twin sister, who she and Master Soul both believed to have died 16 years ago. And I mean, I can't really blame them for thinking that, considering.
What I saw fall. No one could have survived that.
May has been the one behind the killings as she's on a quest for revenge against the 4 specific Jedi who were involved in the cataclysmic fire which destroyed her home and killed all her loved ones. Or at least I assume the Jedi had something to do with that, since that's what she believes, but as of now we still haven't been given enough information to conclude anything really, so we'll just let that lie for now. What I will say is that this motive for vengeance has delivered her right into the hands of a mysterious Sith Lord, who wants her to kill these Jedi so she can prove her worth as a warrior to determine if she might become his next pupil. She also has this helpful sidekick, it's Jason from The Good Place, who seems to know a lot about Sith philosophy, harbors a lot of the same opinions about the Jedi that a Sith of this time period might have, and knows an impressive array of moves that even put May in her place. So this guy is clearly more than meets the eye. I wonder who he could be! The conflict has led both teams to the forest world of Kofar in search of the Wookiee Jedi Kelnaka, who sent himself into exile after having abandoned the post he was stationed to by the Jedi. Due to a lot of time fuckery that we're not even gonna get into, the two teams somehow managed to arrive near Kelnaka's home around the same time, and May had a last-minute character shift in the previous episode, so now she's betrayed Jason, literally left him hanging, and made for Kelnaka's hut so that she can turn herself into the Jedi and face justice, believing she can bargain her way into a lighter punishment by revealing what information she knows about the Sith, which is actually not a lot. Her master has gone to great lengths to obscure his identity to even her, and she isn't apparently smart enough to have figured it out from the very obvious suspect right in front of her, so she has no idea who the Sith is. At best, she would hand herself over to the Jedi, tell them the Sith are back and plotting, and even if they actually believed her instead of writing off her warning as the desperate plea it would sound like, she would essentially have nothing else of value to tell them. This whole thing seems to have been spurred on by the revelation that her sister is alive, which she apparently didn't know until episode 2, and I guess she thinks Osha will somehow be willing or able to advocate on her behalf? Or does she suddenly think that she can trust the Jedi because Osha apparently does? Because that doesn't gel with what we've come to understand about her perspective on the Jedi and Osha's relationship with them, nor is it congruent with what she will say at the end of the next episode, but alright, that's her plan, I guess. But oh no! When she arrives at the Wookiee's home, she finds that the Sith Lord has beaten her there and killed Kelnaka. And double oh no, the Jedi have arrived just in time to surround the domicile and command her to surrender with her hands up. From behind them, the Sith Lord descends into the blurry background of the shot that, honestly, if this were in a better written show, would have worked as some pretty decent, subtle horror. And then the Jedi all turn to face their opponent. He yeets Osha to the side to get her out of the way without killing her, just keep that in mind, and the fight begins. Whoa. It should be worth noting that this is an extremely overpowered feat, even for a Sith Lord. Like, I understand that at this point in the timeline, any Sith would be extremely powerful and would be able to hold their own against several Jedi at once, because that's just basically how the rule of 2 works. Each one should theoretically be getting stronger than the last, and if that's been happening for 900 years, then you're gonna start to see some results. But it's also not lost on me that Palpatine is essentially the culmination of all that power and is therefore the apex Sith Lord. Vader is a powerhouse because he's the chosen one, but Palpatine is nothing to scoff at either, and even he wasn't able to do something like that against half as many Jedi as who Smilo Ren is fighting. But anyway, that's where we left off, so this episode picks up from the perspective of Osha, after waking up what can be presumed was several minutes later. Because of this, the show takes advantage of the ambiguity to position characters in various places that don't really make sense, but where they think they can get away with it because, hey, we don't know what happened. For example, the first group of Jedi we see facing off against the Sith are the nameless cannon fodder. Other than Yord, there is not a single named character in in this fight, which essentially allows the writers to do whatever they want here. Where are Sol and Jecki? Why are they apparently not invested in staying with the fight wherever it leads? If the answer is that they're both out of the fight because Smilo knocked them out, then my question would be why he didn't simply kill them after he did that. But that's a question we're going to be asking a lot throughout this episode, so let's try to pinpoint what this character's motivation is right now, and this will be confirmed later on by him. It's pretty straightforward stuff. He wants May dead for betraying him, and he wants all these Jedi dead because if even one of them lives to tell what happened here, that puts the Sith in serious jeopardy of being discovered by the Jedi. You'd be forgiven for not realizing that was something this guy cared about, given a lot of the things he does across this show, like having May target Jedi that she's personally connected to so that the investigation might naturally lead to the Jedi finding out who she is, which would obviously render her useless as a candidate for an apprentice, since the whole idea at this point is that the Sith operate from the shadows, and they take great pains to make sure their movements aren't seen by the Jedi or the Republic. But that is what he tells us he wants, so throughout this fight, I'm gonna be keeping track of which characters he lets live, which ones he puts off killing, and which characters he does try to kill despite previously being shown to want them alive. Speaking of which, after he picks off several of the extras, Osha decides to try to stun him right as he's about to kill Yord, and it doesn't work, which I have questions about, but we'll get to that. This distracts him from finishing off Yord, and instead he gives chase to Osha. Don't know why he couldn't just quickly stab or decapitate Yord and then go on the chase, nor do I understand why he's hurling his lightsaber at her right now. Like, what? I thought you didn't want to kill her? Otherwise, you could have easily? Like, I don't really care what he does with Osha, I just want him to keep consistent. But it doesn't matter anyway, because Osha is saved at the last minute by Sol. There he is! He's still alive. Let's stop for a second just to get a head count. For simplicity's sake, it looks like all the extra Jedi are dead, so the only characters who are still alive are the ones whose names we know who have speaking lines. Osha and Sol are here, Yord shows up a second later, having apparently circled around the Sith Lord to come up behind the good guys, since he would have come from the direction that was to the Sith's back, and May and Jecki are both still alive and are about to have their own little subplot. There's also this civilian, badger thing named Basil who was brought along to help track May. Not sure where he is right now, but throughout this episode he'll kind of just disappear and reappear at random. Not sure why, he just does that.
I don't see him.
What?
Basil.
Great. I swear we need a tracker just to track our tracker.
Another thing that's worth mentioning before we progress is that the Sith has armor on his helmet and arm that not only blocks lightsaber strikes, but actively causes them to temporarily short circuit, resisting the urge to make an impotence joke.
Did I say anything? He's trying. I didn't say anything.
And this isn't actually explained in the episode, but anyone who's familiar with the lore will be quick to tell you about cortosis, an extremely rare ore that allows you to do just such a thing if it makes contact with a lightsaber. It's been used all over the place in the expanded material, books, comics, video games alike. And you guys know I'm a sucker for the EU, but let's talk about whether or not something like this makes sense for world building. Spoilers, I don't think it does. The thing is, the rarity of a property like this is left intentionally ambiguous so that it can simultaneously be something that almost nobody has access to, but is also something that some of the most wealthy players in the galaxy are able to get their hands on. And that doesn't exactly gel with characters like Palpatine or Dooku, both of whom have significant wealth and very good reason to want to use cortosis for their respective war efforts. In fact, Dooku even tries to do that by mass-producing cortosis battle droids, but he just doesn't have enough of the stuff. I'd argue it makes much more sense to use this on Grievous's mechanical armor, seeing as he is a Jedi killer, so he's going to be seeing a lot of combat against lightsaber wielders. But then again, that's kind of dependent on whether or not Dooku knew the plan was always to discard Grievous once the Clone Wars were over. In which case, here's a better point. Same question, but with Palpatine and Vader. Surely having your right-hand man and top enforcer decked out in cortosis-laden armor would come in handy when a major part of his job is hunting down Jedi. And in any case, I think if the show is going to introduce it as a concept, it'll need to bother explaining what exactly it is, how difficult it is to get a hold of, and why we never see it anywhere else in the other films and shows. Even if it is rare, you still have a Sith Lord of Bane's lineage using it as armor, so that implies that the Sith have at least some kind of access to the stuff by this point in the timeline. What exactly changed within the next century that it would be lost to them? Also, something I don't remember cortosis ever being established to do is protect its wearer from force manipulation. This show kind of takes the concept of characters reading each other's minds and runs it into the fucking ground. I assumed when it was established in The Force Awakens that it only worked on non-Force users, but this show tells us that anyone can do it with anyone. We get this exchange with Sol and Smiley Boy.
You trained May. Show your face.
and let you read my thoughts.
So, apparently he has a Magneto helmet. As long as he wears the mask, he's safe, but his mind is just as susceptible as anyone else's, which makes me question even further why the Jedi didn't even attempt this on him earlier, since that apparently would have worked. I just assumed in good faith that if they did, he would have had some way to mentally block them from finding information he didn't want them to know, but I guess not. Spoilers, I guess. This guy is the Sith Lord. I know you're all really shocked about that revelation. When this fight began and Yord showed up, Sol ordered him to take Osha back to the ship because she's a civilian, and he rather robotically repeated the order back to Osha as he dragged her away.
Civilian, to the ship!
His whole character across this show so far has been that he follows every order without question and never allows his thoughts or feelings to dictate his actions. None of these characters really have anything strong by way of traits, but the very thin ones they do have are more or less pretty consistent, so props for that, I guess. I will, however, expect some kind of arc to happen if he ends up changing his mind about obeying this command, but we'll get to that when we get to it. In the meantime, let's check in with May. She's been hiding out in Kilnaka's home since the fight broke out, but now that Jason is apparently distracted by Sol, she takes this as an opportunity and runs for it, only for Jeki to spawn into existence and attack her. At this point, I'm really not sure what May wants or why she's doing any of what she's doing, but apparently her plan was to just run for the trees and hope for the best. Like 20 minutes ago, she was ready to turn herself over to the Jedi and betray the Sith to them, but now she actively resists arrest and doesn't cooperate with Jeki and try to explain anything to her. To be fair, I don't really expect Jeki to listen to her even if she does try that, so by all means fight her if you must, but what I'm saying is it would make a lot more sense based on what I'm given to understand about what May wants if she actually tried to help the Jedi against Jason. Then at least it becomes clear to them that she's on their side, and that might go a long way in exonerating her from at least some of her crimes. Might get her that lighter sentence she was hoping to barter for. It's risky, but it's a much better plan than running off alone at night into this dark, dangerous forest and hoping the Sith Lord doesn't find you before you can make it back to your ship. Which, need I remind you, is several hours away from here on foot. I also just do not believe Jeki is holding her own in this fight, let alone the fact that, spoilers, she actually wins it, because I'm given to believe that May and Osha are fairly powerful in the Force, at least when they're able to access it, and I don't just think that because they're apparently the product of an immaculate conception akin to Anakin.
Who was his father?
There was no father. I carried him, I gave birth, I raised him. I can't explain what happened.
Where is their father? They have no father.
But because, again, at this point in the timeline, the Sith are incredibly powerful themselves, and they'd be recruiting people with potential similar to or even exceeding their own so that their apprentice can eventually become stronger than them and kill them. Why would Jason even waste his time with someone who can't even defeat an 18-year-old Jedi Padawan, let alone a master who, by the way, May has still not been able to actually defeat in a fight? She killed Indara with a cheap shot and literally just convinced Torben to kill himself, so she's 0 for 3 right now. Why would the Sith want to train her? Anyway, the fight between Jason and Sol ended abruptly when Jason decided to disappear like Batman the second Sol didn't have him in his sights, because I guess going to intervene with Jeki and May takes higher priority for him. He easily could have just killed Sol and then gone to deal with the girls. Considering his power levels, it's actually already kind of nonsense that Sol lasted more than a second against him in this fight, which means I can only conclude that he was toying with him for some reason. Not sure why he would do that when that gives Yord and Osha a head start back to their ship and might mean they expose you before you can catch up to them, but whatever. I guess we're characterizing Jason as extremely reckless with his identity. He apparently wants to kill everyone here, but he's just gonna evaporate into thin air instead of actually finishing off Sol. He attacks Jeki right after she arrests May, and once again we find our Jedi character lasting way longer than she realistically should against this absolute god creature. The most I can give to this fight is the fact that he takes her down in like 5 seconds, but I still think that in itself is way too long. And besides, once she's down, he allows her to get back up and continue the fight, and once she activates a secondary lightsaber, appears to actually be holding her own against him. That's not really how that... You guys know that having 2 lightsabers doesn't automatically equate to greater skill or power than one, right? Like, I feel I need to tell you that because of this scene in Rise of Skywalker, and because this scene is honestly treating it like Jeki is actually doing better now that she has 2. It makes enough sense that all the Jedi would have at least some base level of training with 2 lightsabers just in case the need ever arises to use them, and of course 2 lightsabers is going to intrinsically give you certain advantages you wouldn't have with just one, as we actually see later on in this fight. But you're gonna fight fight with however many sabers you're more proficient with, because that's just how that works. If you primarily wield one lightsaber in most, if not all, combat situations, then you're just gonna be better with one, because that's what you have the most experience with. If Jeki is naturally more adept at swordplay with two, then why doesn't she carry two all the time? I understand this is a small detail, and it's mostly inconsequential, but frankly, I'm still stuck on the fact that she's still in the fight. How has she not been eviscerated yet? But anyway, it doesn't matter, because May uses this opportunity while both of her opponents are distracted to try and slip away, and that prompts Jason to once again abandon the fight so he can chase after her. This is twice now, and the only common denominator is May, so that means he very clearly wants her dead more than any other character here. I'm not sure why that's the case, considering the only threat she poses is she might tell the Jedi about you, and they might believe her, but that's the case for every character here. Only, it would actually have more credibility coming from one of the Jedi, so if anything, kill them first. It seems to me like he's so fixated on May specifically because he's mad she betrayed him, but surely you can deal with her however you want and at your own pace once the Jedi have been dealt with. But alright, just keep that in mind, he wants to kill her very badly. So he chases her through the forest, and there's this really bizarre editing choice that I can't help but laugh at every time I watch this scene over.
Coward. You were going to betray me.
And then he swings his saber at her head and she just manages to dodge it. Was he flying after her? Is that how he's been disappearing from these fights? Is he just jetting off like fucking Superman? Good God. Anyway, she begs his forgiveness, which obviously doesn't work, so he, cuts off her handcuffs? Oh, okay, so I guess he is sparing her then, right? Because that had to have been intentional. He would have had to do that very precisely to avoid cutting her in half, so I guess he's not gonna— oh, okay, now he is trying to stab her again. Okay. Can you make up your fucking mind? Not to worry though, Soul manages to save her just in time by grabbing him with the Force and pulling him back, right into Jeki, who swings for his head and narrowly misses him as he ducks to avoid it. Jeki, so, you know he's wearing armor that short-circuits lightsabers, so why would you aim for his head? Even if that had hit him, it wouldn't actually have killed him, and then you would have been at a disadvantage. If anything, she should have gone for his waist area, so that even if he did duck, she still would have managed to slice him in half. At worst, he flips over the saber rather than ducking underneath it, but either way, at least she would have made a smart decision here. In any case, the fight persists, and there's a lot of, like, kicking. I haven't really talked much about the choreography because that's not exactly my area, but I don't think it's very good in this episode. I think there's a lot of examples of actors waiting for their moment to strike, and it makes it look very awkward as characters clearly have a shot on their opponent that they just don't take because that wasn't in the script. This is the fight that was hyped up by the showrunners to rival the Duel of the Fates, so they really only have themselves to blame for the fact that most people seem to have been underwhelmed or disappointed by it. Not even just that people find it to be bad, it's just mainly they seem to be in agreement that it's not as good, and that's not a comparison a lot of them would have even thought to make if you just hadn't said anything. But I think now it's about time that we need to check back in with Osha and Yord, because as all this has been happening, we've been sporadically cutting back to see them trekking through the forest. It hasn't really been that interesting, that's why I haven't bothered covering it. But there was a scene just a bit ago where Osha warned Yord to shut off his lightsaber, which for some reason he just kept on the entire time. And the reason why is because of the giant bugs. The last episode established them as a factor, and Osha starts to hear them rustling around. She figures the light from his lightsaber will attract them to their location, and he takes the hint to deactivate it. But then my question is, why have these bugs not descended down on all the other characters at Kinlaka's home, Jedi and Sith alike? There's been a lot of lightsaber activity, and they've been making a lot of noise, so I guess the bugs just aren't nearby. Alrighty then, well, they're about to come into play as Osha has just gotten a force vision sort of thing. Basically, she's been periodically having what looks like some kind of vision of May reaching out to her, but it doesn't appear to actually be May, since these started happening before May even knew Osha was alive, so I don't know. But the point is, this is a thing that's been happening, and she's getting one now because May's in danger. And so she tries to convince Yord that they need to go back, and without, like, any resistance, he just goes along with it. I mentioned this earlier, but this was not set up at all. He hasn't had any kind of arc or through line. This is just happening now. The thing about the characters in this show that you'll come to find is that there's really just nothing going on with any of them, and I mean that for literally all of them. Like, I joke about the fact that I have no idea what May is trying to do or why, but I seriously don't, and the same goes for Osha as well. The decisions each of the twins make across and toward the end of this episode are so confusing to me because I genuinely don't understand what what aspect or trait is driving any given action. And as for Yord, we've never had a moment where he meaningfully reflects on his steadfast refusal to disobey a command, and now he's simply doing it because he's worried the Sith is gonna kill Sol and Jecki. But if that was enough to override his dogma, then why wouldn't he have just stayed there when Sol was ordering him to leave? Maybe you could argue it's because he's had time to think about it, but like, show me that. Like, have them talk about it or something, please. This fight is progressing as though Sol and Jecki by themselves are actually managing to give Jacen a run for his money, so imagine if Yord had been there to tip the scales. Imagine if he'd been here from the beginning and was able to help Sol in his 1v1. The power scaling for Jacen just isn't being applied consistently, so there's really no way of knowing what would have happened, but still, Yord has apparently had an arc entirely off-screen that's caused him to change his mind about this, and we're never gonna find out what prompted it, because the next time we see him, he fucking dies. Any kind of character setup the show kind of does in previous episodes goes absolutely nowhere and then gets tossed out the window in favor of arbitrarily killing off the characters for the sake of manufactured stakes. But like I said, the bugs are about to be a factor because Osha seems to get the idea to turn on her flashlight and lead them back toward the fight. So with that in mind, what exactly do we think is gonna happen? From this, I would imagine her plan is to immediately sick the bugs on Jacen and end the fight without having to get too close. Or if it's a matter of having to stick the flashlight onto his back like we see later, then have Yord or yourself do that and then proceed with the bug plan. As is, it reads like another Kenobi-Reva situation where two characters both agree to do something, but they don't actually discuss the logistics or come up with any kind of plan, so instead one of them blunders into a situation for which they're ill-prepared and promptly has their ass kicked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back at the fight, Jacen headbutts Sol's lightsaber, taking it out of commission for a few minutes, which is way longer than it lasted for these guys, but whatever. This material really just comes across like an excuse to take certain characters out of the fight arbitrarily rather than actually write a reason why they might have fallen behind. But even then, I don't buy what happens next, because basically Jecki advances forward to keep fighting the Sith while he does God only knows what. And this goes on for like 7 seconds before finally this happens. Even if Sol doesn't have a lightsaber, I still don't believe that that would have been enough to make him stand back and let his Padawan go at this dangerous monster alone. And if he wasn't willing to continue the fight until his saber was back up and running, then he should have communicated that with Jecki before she ran off to go fight Jacen. Or fucking pull her back with the Force. Get her out of there. I wouldn't necessarily say any of the characters are good, but Sol was one of the ones that I actually kind of liked, and this has dealt him significant damage. And there's a lot more to come for him by the time we wrap up here. Now, this is the scene that really Jason's my Statham. There's a lot to break down here, but we should start with the fact that during the fight, Jecki managed to knock off Smilo's helmet, so now we get the big reveal that I've already spoiled for you, the one nobody could have seen coming. This is the equivalent to watching an episode of Scooby-Doo where they only introduce like 1 or 2 suspects that the villain of the week could possibly be, and then that's the one it ends up being. Only that's a children's cartoon that wasn't ever trying to be that difficult to figure out, and this is supposed to be a serious production. Basically, Leslie Headland said that they didn't even try to make it hard to figure out because everyone would have guessed it anyway, so alright then. Not very much mystery in this mystery show, is there? So Jacen manages to distract Sol and throw his cloak on his head long enough for him to grab May by the throat and take her hostage, which, I mean, I guess I can buy would be enough to make Sol want to approach this cautiously. They've sort of been hinting at some deeper secret about what happened in their shared past that he and the other Jedi feel guilty for, so maybe he feels he owes it to her to try and save her life. But A, why did he throw his lightsaber down when that wasn't even specifically requested by Jacen? And B, why is Jacen even taking her hostage at all? Why is he dragging this out instead of immediately killing May like he clearly wanted to do earlier? This scene goes on for several minutes and he
starts monologuing.
He starts monologuing.
What are you?
I have no name, but a Jedi like you might call me Sith.
Oh, fuck. No, okay, shit. Sol has to die now. Every single person here has to fucking die now. It's over, guys. Okay, so let's get into this because there's a lot to go over. First and foremost, when the marketing around the show first released, there was a lot of discussion around the fact that we were going to see what looked to be multiple Jedi going up against a dark side user who was probably a Sith, and this obviously raises a lot of questions because, well, as far as the Jedi knew by the time of the Phantom Menace, the Sith were gone, and had been for 1,000 years.
He was trained in the Jedi arts.
My only conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
This is only set 100 years before that film, so it would be a pretty massive canon break if it ended up being that a group of Jedi encountered a Sith Lord and lived to tell the tale. Of course, there are defenses to this point that I was happy to go with before the show came out and we had nothing further to go on, which is that there are other factions of lightsaber-wielding Force users out there who draw upon the dark side. Having a red lightsaber does not, by itself, mean that you're a Sith. And while the films themselves never really made any meaningful distinction between the two, surely the Jedi would understand the nuances therein and not immediately jump to conclusions. This is all true, and I'm okay with that as a potential way to write yourself out of this, but the problem is, now we have the content, and that interpretation is just no longer supported. See, the thing is, the Sith are extremely powerful, more so than any average dark side sect or Jedi splinter group or offshoot, and the Jedi recognize that. If you actually pay attention to the dialogue in episode 1, that's basically the main determining factor for how the Jedi conclude Darth Maul was a Sith. Qui-Gon was sure of it just based on having had a brief encounter with him in the desert and observing that he was trained in the Jedi arts. But the Jedi Council were more skeptical at first. It was only after the final duel on Naboo that they came around to the idea, and in fact declared that there was no doubt it was the case.
There's no doubt the mysterious warrior was a Sith.
The only thing that would have changed between these two moments was that Maul overpowered and defeated a Jedi Master in a one-on-one battle, something the Jedi apparently don't believe just any old Darksider can do. The fact that there were 9 Jedi on Kofar and all but one of them were slaughtered by the same Darkside user implies that he's a Sith, even if he hadn't expressly told Sol that he was one, which, why would you do that if you're trying not to risk exposure? I'm starting to think this motherfucker might be lying about what he wants, but it's this scene that reinforces that as his apparent motivation.
She exposed me. So now I have to kill every single last one of you. And the Jedi say I can't exist. They see my face. They all die.
People are arguing that he's not actually a Sith and that there's some nuance to his wording, which we'll go over in a second. But when we talk about whether or not this breaks canon, we're not actually looking at whether the Jedi actually fought a Sith or not. Even if he isn't one, that wouldn't change the fact that they would believe he is, and that fucks with what they believed about them by the Phantom Menace. By the way, I'm inclined to agree with the Jedi that basically the only kind of Darkseid user who should actually be able to physically outmatch a Jedi Master in a 1v1 is a Sith. So if Jason isn't one, but he's somehow this powerful, then I'm gonna need an explanation for how the fuck. The phrasing, "a Jedi like you might call me Sith," is what a lot of people are latching onto to make the case that he actually isn't one, implying that there's nuance to what might be considered a Sith versus a standard Darkseid user, and apparently the Jedi are so dogmatic that they view them all the same. So he's not a Sith, but from the perspective of a Jedi, he might as well be. This seems to kind of line up with a theme the show is trying to explore with the way they treated the witches in the 3rd episode, and while I find it supremely stupid, I can honestly see that being what they're going for. But again, what matters here is what the Jedi believe about the situation, and even if they actually conclude after all this that Jason wasn't really a Sith, this would still be something that they'd bring up in conversation when Qui-Gon declares his assertion about Maul and the Phantom Menace.
My only conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord.
Well, no, not necessarily, Qui-Gon. There was that one really powerful rogue Darksider running around 100 years ago who turned out not to be a Sith. This guy could just be like that, or could even be a descendant from his line of training. Let's not be hasty with our conclusions, young man.
There's no doubt the mysterious warrior was a Sith.
Necessarily not. Jason from the Good Place, a Sith, was he not? My point is, this would factor into the conversation regardless of if Jason was a Sith or just some rogue Dark Lord, and this was an event that happened in living memory for a lot of people on the council, like Yoda, Yaddle, Urael Poof, that snake guy whose name I'm scared to try and pronounce because I always get it wrong, and guess who else? Ki-Adi fucking Mundi. They introduced him in the last episode and confirmed it was him in the credits. He was alive during the show, and he was in the know about all of this. So, basically, in the last episode, Vernestra called a small council meeting to figure out what was going on, and Mundi was there, meaning he at least knows about May and is aware that she was trained by some mysterious person. They made a point to have Vernestra not want the Jedi High Council informed of what was happening because they would be inclined to tell the Senate about it.
We must alert the High Council.
The High Council would be obliged to inform the Senate. A scandal like this would inspire fear and mistrust. We should handle this ourselves.
Which doesn't really make any sense for a number of reasons. why would the council do that if it doesn't benefit them politically, which is what Vern seems to be afraid of? And also, why are all these Jedi just going along with lying to the Jedi Council? But that's the reason they give us for why they haven't been told. So here's the thing. You can no longer hope that this secret somehow dies with the Jedi who know about it, because Mundy can't die here. He, at the very least, has to survive until the prequels, so we really shot ourselves in the foot with this one. According to Claire Keachel, one of the co-writers of Episode 4 on Twitter, Mundy was only added to the scene because they couldn't get a hold of Yoda like they wanted, so they went with him instead. They were apparently so hell-bent on having a prequel Jedi be in this conference room for some reason, and I seriously just don't know what to make of that. That either means they have something planned to try to justify this writing decision, or they just seriously weren't giving this any level of thought and didn't realize what it would mean to have a Jedi from the films be made aware of what was going on. But whatever the logic behind it, we know Mundy was there, and we know that Sol survives this encounter and gets back to the ship by the end of the episode. Skipping ahead a bit to the end, Sol goes back to the ship with May, who he believes is Osha due to stupid reasons that we'll get to later. She's pretending to be her own twin. Brilliant. But he does get back to the ship, which we've seen to be capable of contacting the Jedi on Coruscant, so that's something he would immediately do after departing the planet, surely. I mean, unless Sol is just chronically stupid, and I suppose at this point a case could be made for that, he's gonna tell the Jedi about it, and I have no reason why Vernestra wouldn't at least confide this information to her small council, since she apparently trusted them enough to carry the secret in the first place. It would be really weird if Mundy doesn't learn about the fact that Jason called himself a Sith, and I think the only way you can write that to happen is if you just make every character act incredibly stupidly, or if you have May, like, kill Sol instantly after the next episode begins. And what would be the point of that? What a weird writing choice that would be, having him survive all that and trek all the way back to the ship, only to be killed off the very next time we see him. Plus, I'd say I don't even know why May would do that, but that doesn't really help me since I don't know why she does anything. So let me put it this way. She's had plenty of better opportunities to kill him before they got to the ship, so if that's what she wanted to do, I don't see why she hasn't already. And by the way, on the matter of who this person is, who exactly is Chimere? That's his actual name. I've been calling him Jason this whole time because it's funny, but it's apparent to me that you guys might not actually know his name. See, it was my understanding that during those 1,000 years between Bane and Palpatine, the Sith were hiding in the shadows, accumulating wealth, power, and resources, and slowly chipping away at the Republic from the inside. The basic idea was that they were men of status and acclaim, and could therefore be positioned into spots where they have great influence on the going-ons of the galaxy. I know I'm pulling this from an external source, but it made a lot of sense to me in the Plagueis novel that the alter egos for the Sith characters were all powerful men in their own right. Plagueis' Master Tenebris was the head of a prominent shipbuilding company. Plagueis himself was the leader of Damask Holdings, which had a significant stake in the intergalactic banking clan and therefore played an influential role in the galactic economy. And he chose as an apprentice a young boy from a prominent house on Naboo who made a name for himself in the Senate and eventually rose to the rank of Chancellor. They all did their part to orchestrate events on a large scale while playing the guise of unassuming businessmen, and they were all public figures who were easily recognizable to the public at large. Because the only way to truly influence politics and affect any real change is if you allow people to know your face. Or at the very least, the face you allow them to see. I guess Jason isn't any kind of public figure though, because if he is, it would have been really stupid of him to show his face to May or the Jedi while pretending to be some ordinary lowlife. Any one of them could have recognized him, and if he is, then it's extremely convenient that none of them did. But if not, what is Jason contributing to the grand plan exactly? Timeline-wise, we're so close to the end. We're so close to the rise of Palpatine that you'd think by now, anyone who's part of Bane's lineage wouldn't be able to go anywhere without being recognized, but apparently not Jason. I just find that very interesting, that's all. But anywho, we finally get back to what I was saying earlier about how Yord and Osha apparently didn't communicate the plan to each other, because instead of sticking the flashlight to Jason's back and letting the bugs descend upon him, Yord runs up, picks up the mask, and attacks Jason from behind. He does manage to depower Jason's lightsaber for a bit with the mask, but it's unfortunately not enough, as this is a character who's very physical and very deadly. He's easily able to overpower Yord, snap his neck, and toss him to the side. Bye, Yord. You'll be, missed? I don't know. All the while, Sol was just standing there doing nothing, of course. That's too Yomi Jr. The perfect opportunity to get involved would have been when Jason and Yord were locked and he had his back turned to you, but whatever. You do you. He doesn't even seem that broken up about it either. Not like with Jecki. Poor Yord. It's only after Yord dies that Sol finally decides to get back into the fight. But instead of simply picking up his lightsaber, which is only a few feet away on the ground, he just goes for hand-to-hand combat against this guy who just showed off how skilled he is in that regard. Jacen currently does not have a functioning lightsaber thanks to Yord's heroics, and Sol does not monopolize on that opportunity at all. But it's okay, I guess, because somehow he wins, and then he picks up his lightsaber to make one final decisive blow. And...
Oh, fuck off. Fuck off.
Sol just lost his Padawan, and her murderer proceeded to call her It.
Was that its name?
On top of having killed all the other Jedi here, and finally we get to see some fucking character work happening. Sol has already been established as a less than orthodox Jedi, and finally he's attacking with anger and not holding back. It would have been so much more interesting if he actually went through with it and killed Jacen in anger, and to be honest, I don't believe Osha yelling stop should have been enough to stop him. And that's only looking at this from the perspective of if it's morally justifiable to kill Jacen right now, which anyone can argue that it is, given the danger he still represents and has already wrought on so many good people. But none of that is going to be explored because...
The Jedi do not attack the unarmed.
Unarmed? Unarmed? Motherfucker, he is not unarmed. Just because he doesn't currently have his lightsaber in his hand doesn't suddenly make him less dangerous. He still has the Force, and you've just seen what he can do without either of those things. His body is the fucking weapon. Now, I would actually argue that it's a good tactical decision to not kill Jacen right now because he's worth so much more to the Jedi as a prisoner they can interrogate. I say knock him out, restrain him significantly, cut off his fucking hands if you have to, take him back to Coruscant and get all the information you can out of him, such as who he is, what he is, if the Sith are really back, and how many are out there besides him. And they just established that even Jacen can be subject to having his mind read by Jedi so long as he isn't wearing his Magneto helmet, so absolutely take him prisoner. But not only has Sol not done anything yet to restrain him before turning off his fucking lightsaber, but his actual reasoning for why he decides to spare him is bizarre. It has nothing to do with taking a prisoner or learning anything from him. Osha only just now remembers the bug plan and signals to Sol that that's what she wants to do, which he picks up on, and that's why he turns off the lightsaber. Then, when Jacen obviously gets back up, recalls his saber, and poses a threat to them, Osha runs up, sticks the flashlight droid onto his back, somehow avoids getting her head chopped off, and then the bugs decide now is a good time to attack. Not when all the other flashy lights and loud noises were happening, only now that a little flashlight is on Jacen back and he can't get it off for some reason. This whole thing is just so strange to me because, Sol, what do you think will happen to Jacen once these bugs attack him? Do you think they might kill him? I can guarantee that'd be a much more gruesome death than what he would have gotten if you'd just taken his head off, so if this is you taking the moral high road, then I don't think you're doing it right. I wonder if someone will unironically defend this by saying, well, now he's armed, so they're cool with whatever happens to him. That would be so funny, because that's basically the wolf from Puss in Boots getting Puss to pick his sword back up to make it a more honorable death. Like, it's not more moral to let your opponent retrieve a weapon just so you can justify attacking him with giant monster bugs. The fuck am I even watching? But that's without getting into the obvious tactical faux pas that is letting this happen. Because, for one thing, if he does die as you seem to hope, then any chance of learning more from him about the Sith or whatever faction he comes from is gone. They originally came here to get that information from May, but seeing as they already knew her knowledge is limited, surely getting it out of Jacen would be a lot more helpful. But if he doesn't die, then that means you just essentially let him get away and continue to pose a threat to you and your order, when you could have just captured or killed him now and would have definitively known his fate. It really doesn't matter what angle you look at it from. This was just a terrible plan. By the way, I skipped past this, but while the Yord stuff was going on, May took this opportunity to slip away and was promptly shot by Osha with a stun gun, so she's been knocked out for about 2 minutes, which is apparently how long the effects of this gun last, because she's up and at him by the end of the scene and manages to pull the gun from Osha's belt and shoot Sol with it, which does knock him out, telling me that it does work on powerful Force users, so I really don't even know what to make of Jacen tanking that earlier. Either way, Sol is out of commission, so that gives Osha and May about 3 minutes or so to chat, or at least you'd assume so, but it appears to still be nighttime, and the next scene happens during sunup, so, it's unclear just how much time has passed. At any rate, this is a conversation between two characters who haven't actually spoken to each other in 16 years and didn't even know the other was alive until like 2 days ago. It's also one between two characters who I know basically nothing about because one of them flip-flops on motivation every other scene, and the other's only defining characteristic is that she's a good person. There's nothing to grab onto, and all the decisions made here come off as arbitrary because of it. In this scene, we're meant to feel like Osha is being tempted by the prospect of running away with her sister and making up for lost time, but because I've been given no indication that that's even what she wants, and the last time they saw each other as children, May tried to fucking murder her because she wanted to leave, I'm just not sure why that would sound enticing to her. And yeah, she makes the decision to arrest May rather than join her, but because I know nothing about her, I really could have seen this going either way. By comparison, I understand why Luke might be tempted toward the dark side during the throne room sequence in Return of the Jedi, because I've come to understand what he values and how those could be tested. I understand why he wants to redeem his father, because I know how much of a pedestal he put Anakin on when he decided to follow in his footsteps and become a Jedi, and I understand why it's a struggle not to give into his anger because it seems like everything he cares about is going up in flames around him. I can see this conflict going either way because I know Luke and what he's trying to accomplish, but I also understand why he might be tempted toward the quick and easy path. He's a well-rounded character whose motives are laid bare, so when he makes a decision, I can point to all the things that caused him to make it. I just can't say the same for Osha. Also, I mentioned this earlier, but again, May seems to believe that the only reason Osha might have to trust in the Jedi is that she was brainwashed to believe their lies, so she clearly has a very specific and low opinion of the Jedi, so I don't understand why she was ready to turn herself in the last episode, nor do I get why that's suddenly changed now. But obviously trying to arrest May fails because Osha's out of practice and still can't connect to the Force properly, so May gets the upper hand and knocks her out. She then calls a lightsaber to her hand, bends down and uses the hot plasma blade to cut her hair down to Osha's length so she can disguise herself as her. Again, I don't know why she's doing this, but I don't know, I guess we'll find out in the next episode. But I do think it's very funny that she used the lightsaber to do this, considering that's stupidly dangerous and unnecessary since she has knives. That's like her whole thing, and it only adds to the many factors that should go into Soul recognizing instantly that she's not Osha because her fucking hair would smell recently burnt. And just because two people look alike doesn't suddenly mean they're indistinguishable through the Force. Yoda even makes a point to say that to the clones in the very first episode of the Clone Wars.
Come, sit. Your helmets, remove them. Your faces I wish to see.
There's not much to look at here, sir. We all share the same face.
Deceive you, eyes can. In the Force, very different each one of you are.
So Soul should definitely be picking up on all these things. He asks fake Osha where May is, and she responds that she ran off and that they need to get back to the ship. And this is apparently enough convincing to get Soul to do just that, despite the fact that the entire point of this mission was to capture May and get all the information they can out of her about the Sith. But I'll at least defend this decision on the basis that it's much more tactically advantageous to get back to the ship and call the Jedi immediately so that the information Soul has is sure not to die with him. My assumption, if we're taking the show in good faith, would be that he plans to do that, await further orders, and then continue searching this planet for May to arrest her, and to scour the forest just to make sure Jason is dead, because obviously, if that's not how it plays out in the coming episodes, I'm gonna want a damn good explanation for why. So that's fine, but it doesn't excuse him not recognizing May, and it definitely doesn't excuse the fact that he doesn't pick up Jason's mask and take it back with him. You'd think the Jedi might be able to run DNA scans on that thing and maybe even find out Jason's real identity, but I guess our boy was just too frazzled to think straight at this point. It's been a long night after all. So he and May head back to the ship, and guess who else shows up? Basil! You'd be forgiven for having forgotten about this little fucker, but he spawned back into existence a few minutes ago to find the little pip droid that Osha sacrificed. I don't know if this is set up for something important later, or if the writers just couldn't stomach Pip being left to die, but either way, it's pretty lucky that A, Basil was on this exact path at the right time to find it just as it dropped to the ground, and B, that the fucking Sith Lord, who's like 10 feet away, didn't sense and decide to execute him since he's yet another living witness. And then the final scene is Jason approaching the unconscious Osha to, I guess, recruit her. I don't know. He seems to want her alive again, so that's fun. You'll also notice that they play the Kylo Ren theme here.
We are.
Which they also played very faintly at the beginning when Osha first woke up.
Go away.
implying some sort of connection to Kylo that exists between both of these characters. Not sure what it means yet, but some are already theorizing that they'll end up being the proto-Knights of Ren or something. I mean, people did remark on the fact that his helmet looked pretty similar to Kylo's, to the point where the fanbase even nicknamed him Smilo Ren, so I guess there's merit. This would, I guess, mean that he's not a Sith and play into that theory I mentioned about how, as far as the Jedi are concerned, all dark side factions are the same. But my god, if he's the original Knight of Ren, then how fucking powerful are these little shits? We've already gone over all the reasons why, even if that is the case, that doesn't really fix the problem, so I won't get into that again. But the last thing I will point out is the fact that he fucking force heals her. It's almost imperceptible, but it does happen, and that's just wonderful. Just what we needed to bring back this overpowered feat. So that was the end of this absolute train wreck of an episode. I wish I could say I was surprised or disappointed or anything, but this show just sucks. I really wasn't expecting any better. I will still be covering The Acolyte in full once the season is out, and it'll be a much more broad strokes review than what you received here, but the show at large has a lot more to go over, so there's plenty more where that came from. As for the meantime, I currently have 3 live streams going over this show with Jolly and others in pretty excruciating detail, so if you're looking for more coverage that's thorough and picks through every little scene, then that should be right up your alley. If that's not your thing, then why are you still watching this video?
I don't enjoy Schindler's List, but so I guess that's bad.
You don't enjoy Schindler's List?
Whoa, stop the stream. What the hell?
No. Well, of course I don't think it's a movie you're supposed to enjoy is the thing, right?
Okay, well, you mean it that way. Okay, right.
I meant it that way.
Okay, because there's a difference between I enjoy this as a film and I enjoy what's happening in the film.
Yeah, I don't take glee in the context of what's happening.
I love this movie. I just love the way I said that, and you guys are like, what? You guys don't enjoy the Holocaust? Like,
Okay, but in all seriousness, thanks for watching, and a big thank you to Southpaw for helping me edit this video. I would not have gotten this out as fast as I did without his help, and he does excellent work, so please go check out his channel linked in the description. Otherwise, that's all I've got for you this time, so I will see you when the rest of this god-awful pile of horse dung releases. Bye, all. To be fair, I don't really expect Jesse... Not necessary. I can't do it.